Welcome back to BLOCKTV, and you're watching Chain Breakers, where we get the chance to meet the people shaping the crypto sphere. Of the many use cases for blockchain, a true reality and space in which blockchain can have an immediate effect is social impact. A platform doing just that is Grassroots Economics. The company helps create community currencies to act as a regional means of exchange that supplements the national currency system. To break it down for us, we are joined in studio by Ziv Keinan, founder of Ziv Keinan Law, specializing in security tokens, and via Zoom by Will Ruddick, the founder of Grassroots Economics Foundation. Hi guys, how are you? First, Will, how are you, Will?
Morning. Doing great, doing great. It's a beautiful day here in Kenya.
Oh, very cool. And Ziv, obviously, as well. Great to have you here. Now, kind of pushing it off to back to Will here now. So can you please break down what Grassroots Economics works to achieve?
Sure. So for 10 years now, we've been coming into villages and informal settlements and working with really low tech means. And just in the last few years, we've been getting more and more kind of digital and high tech on this. But essentially, back in the day, we would print vouchers in the community and they would circulate within that community as a voucher for goods and services. Excuse me. And so an example, one 20 shilling note, which is about 20 cents on the US dollar, would be changing hands about twice a day. And that would be feeding about 700 meals within the year, that one piece of paper. And so, you know, the effect of it was that we're tapping into all the excess capacity of those communities, that there's a lot of goods and services to trade. And we have this situation where people just don't have money. It's like a really chronic case, you know, certain places in Kenya, but actually the majority of villages and towns here have really chronic volatility of their markets. And, you know, in January every year, for instance, like the markets usually just completely tank. And it happens seasonally, it happens even on weekly basis. And, you know, the actual availability of cash in these systems is extremely low. And so that goes for, you know, education, school fees, paying for a barber, paying for a meal, and it goes into the farmers and how they work and, you know, how they're getting markets for things. And so we're really just going in there and saying, hey, you guys have a lot of work you can be doing and are doing. Let's just create a market together and let's have you create your own currency to do that. And, you know, fast forward to today, we're starting to basically have them create their own tokens to do this. And we're using the blockchain as the public ledger for them to put their tokens, you know, for each village onto a market. You know, these tokens they're backed by their goods and services and they're tradable on these markets, and their value related to each other is basically pegged to their trade deficit between each other. So we have like an emergent economy kind of going on right now, and it's really exciting.
So, I mean, I want to throw this out. You kind of mentioned how you guys are working in the blockchain and crypto space, but I do want to throw this over to Ziv. As somebody who works with social impact companies or people who are trying to be in that space, how do you see that they are utilizing blockchain and crypto in that space, and how is it superior to other solutions?
So, as you mentioned, I'm really fortunate to work with the Blockchain for Social Impact project. Personally, I'm an enthusiast of that field of blockchain for social impact. And today I'm leading the Good Dollar project. I'm a legal lead for the Good Dollar project, which is a crypto-based project based on the principles of universal basic income. I'm also an advisor for FinTech for Good and for LibraCamp and other organizations that work in this cross-section between blockchain technology and impact. And I think, you know, at its core, the ideology behind the blockchain technology is very much correlates with the social impact space. And the people that work in this space, they want to create a social impact. So it's not, you know, it's not uncommon to see a bigger organizations such as Binance, for example, doing a social impact space through the Binance Foundation, which you interviewed last week.
Right,
yeah, so they're doing a very interesting work. But this time I've asked Will to join us. I think there's several things about Will which is very different and very interesting. First of all, there is kind of it doesn't have like a big, organization behind him. It's like a lone wolf. He left the cozy, he left the cozy seats of Silicon Valley, moved to Kenya to start his project. The other thing which is interesting that his project is very much advanced. Already got like 40,000 transactions over the blockchain. The blockchain, which is, coming back to your questions, make everything very swift, very automated,
right.
and it's only natural for those populations to leapfrog from the paper money to the blockchain electronic money. And we've seen it with the M-Pesa in Kenya and with Will projects.
Right, and I think, Will's project is a bit different, but I think in terms of people donating, philanthropists in that space like the fact that their money is going somewhere where they can track it and things are actionable and incentivized and people can see where their money is going and how it's having an impact.
What are you looking for when you donate money? You want to know that the money went to the person who needs it, and the impact. You want to see the impact of what you do. So I think blockchain definitely provides it. There's also organizations like the ICSO Foundation that provide like certificates on the blockchain that track after the donation, so
right.
A lot of interesting use cases for blockchain technology.
So and also a lot of ways of tracking in general. Well, I would like to ask you though, how is it that you ended up getting into blockchain and cryptocurrencies to begin with? So Ziv here was saying now about Silicon Valley, and you kind of left your comfy seat there. But how is it that you got into blockchain and crypto?
Yeah, well, okay, so we've been trying to go digital for a long time, and this is sort of a movement going back maybe 30, 40 years, like around the Great Depression. There was all sorts of currencies popping up all over the world, and there still are all the time, and they tend to sort of pop up, and then they have different types of issues, and they tend to fall apart after a while. And one of the biggest problems has been, how do you connect them together? What is the solution on developing basic protocols that connect tokens together? And the blockchain, when we first started to go digital, it was maybe about 5 years ago, and we ran into the problem that the rails were too expensive. We were running, it wasn't necessarily the database systems, but it was the working through the telecoms, right? So we're using feature phones for the most part. You're seeing a smartphone there, but really most, 99% of our users are on feature phones. So they don't have internet, and the cost of going through the local telecom to provide them little menus was very expensive back then. And all of a sudden, within the last year, that's really broken free, and it's a lot cheaper to do. To the point where it's less than a cent to do a transaction, and that should be falling off more and more rapidly. And people are also moving to smartphones. But so the move to blockchain was really much more than going digital. It was about how to connect currencies together, right? How do we create an open system so that anyone can create their currencies and put them on an open market? And what does that open market look like? And without blockchain, we're limited to essentially kind of SQL database versions of this that are not very extensible. They're not scalable in that sense. And so building more and more users. So it was about it's about a year ago that we applied for a grant with the Bancor Protocol Foundation. And that protocol, which is an open source protocol, is a really interesting tool on how to balance these communities together and provide an instantaneous protocol for them to have price discovery and to really know their exchange rates with respect to one another, right? So the blockchain was a really cool solution, really the only solution that I can imagine at this point for enabling these communities to connect with each other without a middleman, without an exchange, right? We can't have an exchange between 7,000 villages in Kenya. It's, that there's not enough money in the system anyways to pay for that exchange. The cost of going into exchanges is really high. And so if there can be an automated system that adjusts based on trade deficit, then you have the beginning of what we might think of as like the internet of currencies, right? So this is like, basic protocol layers that allow people to build on top of them different types of applications. And, the currency layer there that's going into these communities. Well, there's also layers on top of that in terms of, which interfaces are they using? Is it a USSD system or a smartphone or QR coded, receipt papers? And then there's all sorts of backends. And as Ziv is talking about there is around, the aid industry. And, on one side, we're just talking about currency creation as a general concept and movement. And on the other side, we're talking about, well, how does the aid industry piggyback on this movement and vice versa? And recently we've been working with Red Cross. In fact, historically, we've done a lot of work with post Red Cross sites where Red Cross has come into an emergency dealing with food security. And we come in to basically say, well, all those activities that Red Cross was doing, well, can the community actually pay for that themselves over time? Can we create real sustainability? Like, for instance, Red Cross will come in and develop food security programs that enable communities to come together and do collective farming. And they'll inject cash into those systems. Well, once the cash is gone, how sure are we that those systems are going to actually continue? And then does Red Cross still have to come in year after year? And that happens in a lot of the places around the world. So the idea, and so this is a really exciting movement right now, with Red Cross to say, well, can we take the concept of cash transfer, which is super important during emergencies? We need to be able to help people immediately, but can we at this, so we're filling a bucket that has a big leak in it, essentially, right, into a community. Can we also shore up that leak as well? Can we actually make sure that those resources stay longer in those communities? And so the idea is really yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, so this idea, this narrative you were speaking of earlier with everybody now has a smartphone, it's the narrative that's going around, especially in regard to social impact, when people say this is how we can get it done, because although people don't have X, Y, and Z, they do have a smartphone, and we are able to get help or to provide help via that little device that most people have, which is kind of, it's true, that's where the narrative is going. Yes, Steve?
So I've got a Will Ruddick.
Right. So yeah, this is before you guys went digital.
So this is before Will was digital. You can see you have like the Fed. This is Will Ruddick's signature here, and this is like the original Bangla Pesa, and you can understand how complicated it is to print it. I don't know, you probably printed it in your own printer, and then to store it. This is like real money, okay? So how do you store it? Where do you keep it? How do you keep it safe? So there's a lot of, and how do you track when it travels between, the transaction? How do you have your statistics of the use of the currency? So you can imagine how much this technology, this blockchain technology, assisted Will with developing his project.
And so, and speaking of the Bangla Pesa, there was a documentary, the Bangla Pesa documentary, and kind of about this project and what exactly is going on. So before we keep breaking it down and talking about it, I would like to take a little look at how this impacts the communities that it operates in.
How much do you charge them?
1 jerrycan of full of water is 5 shillings. That is 5 shillings community money. Okay. The community money's value is the same as our Kenya money. If it is 5 shillings Bangla Pesa, that is the community money, it is 5 shillings Kenya money. So this is how we do it. And this water is used for washing clothes, utensils, for mopping the house, and it really assists even when there is no water when there is no tap water.
How much Bangla Pesa do you have now?
I have a lot of money today because there was no tap water, and people came with Bangla Pesa. I have almost 100 and
This
something.
is all almost from today?
Yeah, this is from today. There's no water. There's
40, 50, 60, 70, 80. So 280.
Yeah, and I'm still expecting more money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what are you going to use this for?
I'm going to buy tomatoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, at night hours, I'm also going to eat. So I'll pay it back to them so that I can get my daily.
So by the end of tonight, you'll have almost none.
Yeah, by the end of when it comes to dark,
Yeah.
I'll already go to do shopping with it.
And then tomorrow you'll get
Yeah,
more
I'm
again.
going
So
to
it's
eat
just
fish.
coming and going.
I'm going to eat fish.
Now there's this idea of creating separate community currencies. That's what you guys do. My question is, logistically, what is the benefit of creating these separate community currencies as opposed to just having one currency that could then be used in the same way?
Well, we want to back them by local goods and services. Like, we want to say that what is the value of that currency? Well, the value is not the aid funding or the Good Dollar Project or any of these things. Like, those can add, those are, and we can talk about how do we link those together, but fundamentally the value comes from the people. And, this is it's a big philosophical thing as well, but it's just to say, like, where is their resilience come from? And if they're depending on external medium of exchange, right, they're always going to be dependent in a certain way. But if their medium of exchange comes from their own value, from their own community, their own goods and services, they have much, much more local resiliency, no matter what. So we do want aid to support these projects and in certain ways, and we do need lots of support, to really build these rails out. But fundamentally, like, the real resiliency comes from communities. And, to say that the only currencies in the world should be either supranational, like Tron coins or national currencies, I think misses the resolution that we really need to affect these actual problems on the ground.
And so we had that example of Emma, which we just saw in the video, of how she's able to utilize the platform. But can you go into the day-to-day of somebody, a small business owner or somebody utilizing the Bangla Pesa, and how that would work on a practical level?
Okay, so our entry point into communities is groups. So we go into to initial groups in a community, and we say, look, you guys can create your own credit, essentially your own voucher for this community. And the group members, they all start getting an airdrop. We create an initial amount for that community that's basically around $6 times the population. Okay, so it's a very little amount per person there, and that is basically spread out through the whole community through these groups. So they do their own, awareness raising and promotion of these projects, and they also they save and reloan that to each other as well. They collect their own interest rates, which is just like a savings rate, which doesn't go to any banks or anything like that. And the members in the community all have their own, they all do something, even if they're employees. So for instance, a school teacher is accepting this as part of or as total part of the monthly tuition for his student. That school teacher is then going to buy water from Emma, for school lunches, or going to buy charcoal to cook his meal. That person selling charcoal is going to use it back at the school, or the whole idea is to really promote this kind of reciprocity, this circulation of currency. And the velocity of money is a really interesting concept here, in that we're seeing velocities at least 2, 3 or more times anything in Kenyan shillings, right? These things are moving very fast, so they're filling a gap within that community. And so practically, how does this work now when you have, this one community doing this thing? They have a supply of these tokens, right? And then there's another community with another supply of these tokens. Well, the only way that they communicate right now is using this Bancor protocol, is basically to establish a reserve currency between them. So we're not connected to...
I'd just like to interrupt. So on the screen right now, we're seeing a simulation video that you have available. Can you please break down what we're seeing?
Sure. I think so. So there you've got, I think, 2 or 3 currencies in the community. You've got, so up in the top right there's like an external market. That would be like Nairobi. So nominally, your money comes from far away, right? It comes from the national government, it comes from the city. And if you're living in these villages out here, or these slums, you get it maybe monthly. If there's like injections, right? There's workers that are essentially exporting their labor to import currency. That's how things work. Or that could be a donor injecting money into a community, but ultimately it all runs back to the city, okay? And now what's happening such that it stays around a lot longer, in a sense, is to say, well, can the community create their own currencies? And in this simulation here, we've got 3 currencies, it looks like, going on simultaneously. And they are providing a buffer system so that, even during those, dry spells where the national currency is not coming through in January because, the labor market has crashed, or maybe there's political movement, or there's a crash in some type of product supply, that they can still resiliently trade with each other, and they can connect with each other through creating reserve currencies. And so those reserve currencies, again, we're not dealing with any volatility in terms of blockchain. We're not on, those reserve currencies are not like publicly tradable instruments. They're just shared among the users, right? They're shared among the currencies. So each currency starts with basically an equal amount of that reserve currency. So their value all stays one-to-one with each other. But as they start to have imbalances in trade with each other, their value starts to change with respect to each other. And then there becomes an opportunity for arbitrage, which basically means that the tomatoes are cheaper in that village. And that means that people are going to start buying from that other village, and that restabilizes those prices, right? So we're trying to create a system where communities can create resilient economies, but they're not totally dependent on just one of those economies. So if a school, heaven forbid, collapses, or there's a fire or something like that, that one currency doesn't pull the entire economy. That instead, like, the currency is the size of the market, right? And so that's, there's all these theories in economics around, what is the unit of the economy for which a currency is valid? And a nation is such a huge thing. There's thousands of markets in a nation. So if you can take a currency or a token down to the scale of a market, well, there's a lot more resolution. That's a much more useful tool. And then knit those currencies together into a much larger community of currencies, then we have a lot more resiliency. And so that's what we're just starting to see now. We're in about like 23 villages right now across Kenya. Some of them are in clusters, some of them are a bit more isolated. We're doing a lot of just learning from the community. And there's a lot of amazing things that the communities are doing right now that we're just in awe of. And a lot of these are movements that have started years ago, and they're starting to adopt these tools. So for instance, the Catholic Relief Services started a thing called SILCs, which are savings and internal lending cooperatives. And they've been starting to adopt this as a tool. So replacing their regular money or their cash with a blockchain token. And they're actually seeing that it's much cheaper for them to trade. They have resiliency, they have bigger markets within their networks, and they're doing all kinds of savings and loans. And so there's a lot of exciting stuff going on in terms of just really learning what's going on and looking at how these things can start scaling into other communities.
And building off of that, and I don't know if you would necessarily see this as the same thing, I'd like to start actually this question with Ziv, as somebody who works with companies aiming to impact socially in some way, shape, or form. What are your thoughts? We've had news of stablecoins seem to be the new trend now. We have Facebook's Libra, and now Binance just came out with news of the Venus project, or the Venus token. What are your thoughts on Facebook's Libra?
Okay, so Venus, I don't think it's very related, okay, but Libra definitely is. I'm personally very excited about the Libra project. You have to understand this is a tectonic move in the blockchain market. Basically, this is, I'm going to conferences a lot. It could be I just returned from Barcelona, and before that, UK, US, and so on, consensus. So I can tell you that when I'm going to a conference, I basically know the main players, we know each other. So this is a very small market still, it's got a lot of hype. You've got your TV show and everybody's talking Bitcoin, but it's a very small market compared to the traditional economy. And having this, giant like Facebook, who's, has a state power, like a central bank, moving into this space, this is tectonic in our world, and having them come out with such a declarations of doing good and financial inclusion, which is part of the Sustainable Development Goals by the United Nations. This is very interesting. Of course, that I'm a big supporter of the Libra project, but I have a concerns, and not concerns like the American legislator had, but more concerns about, is this project actually going to launch? Because as a legal professional, I see like all the complications and hardships and the challenges of executing such a project. And even when you have Facebook back, there's a lot of questions out there that how this project especially because it's backed by real assets, how those assets are kept, what is communicated to the public, how does the AML going to work, so a lot of legal questions. If that project somehow would find a way not to be backed, it might have more like the attributes of a blockchain company that's launched very quickly. And I think that if Facebook, for example, and it's other members of the association, by the way, brilliant work with the governance of the association, the structure that they built. Yeah. So if Facebook and the other members of the association would just, accept Libra on their own platform, maybe it would save some of the headache with having a coin which is backed by by all kind of securities and coins and whatever they're trying to solve. As I told you before, I'm also working with the Libra Camp group. It's not related to Facebook Libra, but they are building a community for the Libra project. Very interesting project. I recommend to watch and see what happens with them. They're like the Israeli type of entrepreneurs running really fast, very aggressive, and see the huge potential of the Libra project. If there's a 1 to 100 chance that this project is going to launch, then I would bet everything I have on this project, because it's just going to be
a behemoth
huge.
of a thing.
It's a behemoth. The people don't understand the impact that it might have. I'm calling here to entrepreneurs, seize the potential, see what's can come out of this project. I think it's a very interesting project. Do not underestimate Facebook. Do not underestimate or question their intention. I think their intentions are pure. I know all the history of Facebook, but the way that they built it through a non-for-profit with 100 members. I think that this is the best we can get.
All right, then there's a lot we have to see there. But then, kind of pushing it over to Will. Going back to that smartphone narrative, could Libra potentially be that smartphone narrative on a larger scale, that community currency in a bigger way?
I think it's exciting, like Ziv said. I think that there's a lot of external organizations out there claiming the value of their tokens, right? And here we are in this environment saying, well, let's say anyone can create a token, right? Communities are creating tokens. How do we connect them together? And what we're doing right now is basically looking at crypto like DAI, for instance, and we're looking at platforms like Sempo, where the DAI could come in and provide a collateral that allows these community currencies to have a doorway out into national currency, to fiat, or into just other realms, right? Like Facebook. And so, if Facebook was able to do something like that, like imagine if you had every group on Facebook could create its own credit system, right? Its own currency for every group on Facebook, and they're backed by a Libra reserve. Well, that's in a sense what we're doing already right now in Kenya. And so that could be a really, if we can scale this idea into those realms, I think there's all kinds of, security asset providing tokens out there. And if Libra can provide a really stable one to use, then also, they enter a realm right now of a lot of ideas in that space, like MakerDAO is doing with DAI.
A lot of interesting developments happening. We definitely have to keep our eyes peeled and worry about our privacy and security and ask a lot of questions, right? What is it? Don't trust, verify is the phrase going around right now. I'd like to thank very much Ziv for joining us and Will Ruddick for joining us as well. It's been great to have you guys on to break that down for us. For all of you folks watching BLOCKTV.com at home, keep on watching for more blockchain and cryptocurrency related news.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.